Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome as we just wait for 5:30 when we'll start talking about 7 points about J.R.R. Tolkien. Just while we wait, our question is, if there was one character from The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings that you could have a cup of tea with, whom would you choose? It is 5:30. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this Monday afternoon, St. Michael at the Northgate Church in Oxford. And on Mondays, we have a little series of 7 points about interesting people from the past or possibly the present. And today it's J.R.R. Tolkien. There is so much that one could say about Tolkien. One could talk about his relationship with Oxford, his amazing understanding of different languages, possibly the best philologist, not an easy word to say, best philologist of his time, knew Old English better than anybody, Old Norse, someone also who really valued different cultures around the world, someone who's very, very keen on friendship and with C.S. Lewis, but with others as well, and loved talking about ideas together. Someone whose faith was deeply important to him, someone whose life was quite difficult early on, and left an orphan brought up by a friend of the family and so on, served in the First World War. But a marvellous academic and a marvellous career, and as a hobby, he wrote amazing books, and various books that we could ponder: Farmer Giles of Ham, Leaf by Niggle, Smith of Wootton Major, The Silmarillion, which of course was published after Tolkien died, so he wasn't responsible for the final editing of that. And I guess his two best known, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Now we try and keep the Monday sessions to about 15 minutes, so forgive me that this will be quite brief, and I thought we'd just focus on The Lord of the Rings and 7 points perhaps that we can take from there. And we're going to split into 2 sections and then back for a conclusion. And it's the nature of goodness and the nature of evil. The nature of goodness and the nature of evil. How does Tolkien depict the nature of goodness? Again, lots that we could say, but perhaps to start off with, that small things can matter. And the hobbits, physically, are small, and they are seen as small, perhaps insignificant, but valued people in Middle-earth, but they really matter. At one point, Elrond says, "This is the hour of the Shire folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. Who of all the wise could have foreseen it?" Now, interestingly, the big heroic characters are still big and heroic. We need Aragorn and Gandalf and Galadriel to do their stuff. But the little people are equally heroic, and their role in this great quest is immeasurable. Perhaps Tolkien is reminding us that who knows what the little people can do. So goodness is often affected by what the little folk do and how they do it. Secondly, goodness, there's a wonderful variety. When the decision is taken and who is going to be the Fellowship of the Ring, who will take the ring on this amazing and dangerous quest. For the rest, they shall represent the other free peoples of the world, elves, dwarves, and men, alongside hobbits and a particular wizard. And one of the great things about the book is that we love the variety. We do not want Gimli to turn into Legolas. We don't want Legolas to turn into Frodo, because we want them as they are individual. And a big theme of Tolkien's background about spirituality and goodness is that there is wonderful diversity and variety. We are not all the same, and that's really good. As opposed to contrast the forces of evil in the book, they tend to end up looking rather the same and a little bit boring, to be honest. And that great phrase from the 20th century, the banality of evil. Whereas the great saints in history, there's been amazing variety and difference there, and that's to be celebrated. The third thing, the people on the good side, they just keep on going. And if you've read the books or read the book, split up into 3 or 6, read the book or seen the films, they just keep on going. And of course, Frodo and Sam, a lot of their journey, they are just keeping on going. Occasionally people find those chapters maybe slightly slower than the others, But I think it's really interesting that Tolkien does not hurry those. He needs to give the impression this was a long journey and a difficult journey, and sometimes a pretty drudgy and boring journey, but they just keep on going. But of course, everybody else is traveling a lot as well. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas chasing the captured hobbits, lots of traveling. Gandalf is traveling all over the place. Lots of traveling, and the forces of goodness, they just keep on going. For us in the challenges that we face, the keeping on going is maybe a sign of goodness through whatever journey we're called to make. Fourthly, there's quite a lot about morality, about people doing the right thing. This little exchange between Éomer and Aragorn. Éomer says, "How shall a man judge to do what to do in such times?" Because the times suddenly feel very different. Aragorn says, "As he ever has judged," said Aragorn, "good and evil have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarves and another among men." So one of the signs of goodness is to keeping to moral virtues. And whatever the situation may be, those great moral virtues stay the same, and we are called to keep them. So 4 very quick things there about goodness in the Lord of the Rings. Small things matter. The apparently insignificant have a role to play. The people, the fellowship on the side of goodness are wonderfully varied. They don't try to turn each other into themselves. They rejoice in their diversity. Thirdly, there's great perseverance, great persistence. They keep on going on the journey that's set before them. And fourthly, this emphasis on morality, that we do what is right, whatever the context. How about evil? What does Tolkien try and say about that? Among the most famous lines in The Lord of the Rings is this exchange, this couplet. "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." And Tolkien there is saying something, of course, about the one ring, which isn't actually this particular ring, but just a visual aid, the one ring, and what that does to people throughout the stories as they see it and ponder what it may do for them. But also he's talking there about evil and what evil tends to do to people. One ring to rule them all. Evil can dominate. If we come under its influence, it will dominate us. We will no longer be free. One ring to find them. There's a searching there. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. One of the interesting things about the ring in The Lord of the Rings is that people react differently to it. And some earlier negative commentators felt that this was very inconsistent. Why doesn't the ring do exactly the same to Gandalf as it does to Smeagol? Why doesn't it do the same to Boromir as it does to Faramir, etc.? But I think what Tolkien had spotted is that temptation will do different things to different people. We will all be tempted by different things with different levels of strength. A friend may be tempted very much by one thing which will leave me untempted, but I may be tempted hugely by one thing which will leave them untempted. And how the ring works on people depends a lot on who they are, their characteristics and personality. And so the reactions will be different. And the level of addiction to the ring varies as well. And I think Tolkien handles that in a very subtle and nuanced way. And it's a reminder that the forces of evil, the power of evil, will work on different way on different people. And we note that some of the big characters, like Gandalf, refuses to take the ring because he doesn't know how he will react if he gets too close. So he's not saying he's strong enough to cope, but he refuses to get even that close. The ring is addictive to some, to many, perhaps to most, except Tom Bombadil. That can be another talk. And it is also destructive. So it shrivels people. It reduces them. And for Tolkien, from his position of faith and just observing how the world works, when people get trapped by evil, they become less of themselves. And this is a profound Christian theme, that Christ comes to set us free, to bring life in all its fullness, to become the people we were always meant to be. Whereas evil will reduce us, will make us less human. As we may know at the end, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler alert, when the big players on the evil side finally end, they are blown away in a puff of wind. It's almost as if there is nothing there. And that takes us on to our next point about evil. Lots of stuff about shadows. In the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. And an interesting philosophical debate over the centuries has been, does a shadow exist, or is it just the absence of sunlight? And in the same way, does evil exist, or is it just the absence of goodness? And there's lots of descriptions about evil which describes it in shadowy terms. In the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. Are the ring wraiths really physical or not quite? Wraiths is a very interesting word. But the Lord of the Nazgul, he stabbed physically. Clearly there's something physical there, but then there's nothing left, and so on. We could spend a long time on that. Does evil exist, or is it just the absence of good? And Tolkien leaves it hanging, as it were, in the book. But part of that is how strong evil is. This exchange between Merry and Treebeard. Will you really break the doors of Isengard? Asked Merry. Treebeard says, Ho hum well, we could, you know. I just ought to say, as some might know, his ho hum well, especially the ho hum, was Tolkien's imitation of C.S. Lewis. Tolkien gives Treebeard Lewis's voice. Ho hum well, we could, you know. You do not know perhaps how strong we are. Maybe you have heard of trolls. They are mighty strong. But trolls are only counterfeits, made by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of Ents, as orcs were of elves. We are stronger than trolls. And again, a big theme in Christian thinking is that evil cannot create. It can only counterfeit. It can only mock. It can only twist, but it cannot create. Two things then on evil. It's addictive and destructive. Conscious that's two in one, really. Addictive and destructive. And then it's quite shadowy, and it is not as strong as goodness. But there are times in The Lord of the Rings where it does seem very strong. And we remember that Tolkien had fought in the First World War, had seen all those horrors. And in conclusion, our seventh point, just bringing it a little bit together. Those on the side of goodness, the fellowship, and others always tend to see themselves as part of something bigger, something other. They see themselves as stewards, not as taking over. Gandalf says these words to the steward of Gondor. Gandalf says, all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. For my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task, though Gondor should perish. If anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come, for I also am a steward. Did you not know? And we think then, who is Gandalf a steward for? Who is Gandalf answerable to? He clearly feels that he is. He is a steward. And this wonderful phrase, if anything passes through this night that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come, he will not have wholly failed of his task. In our lockdown days and through the tricky seasons of our lives, just to hold on to that, though Gondor should perish, if we can still be good stewards of what is fair, what bears fruit, what can flower again in days to come, then we are fulfilling our stewardship well. Again, the sense that the fellowship note that goodness is stronger than evil. Sam, he's now in Mordor and it's all looking pretty hopeless. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Light and high beauty represented here by the star that's going to outlast whatever the shadow may look like, a small and passing thing. And then when the Council of Elrond comes together, Elrond has said these words. When I said, and then the Council of Elrond, this happens much earlier in the book, but it sets the scene. That is the purpose for which you are called hither. Called, I say, though I have not called you to me, strangers from distant lands. And the careful reader is then thinking, well, if Elrond hasn't called this meeting, then who has? What has stirred up? Who has stirred up the desire in these very different people to meet together? You have come and are here met in this very nick of time, by chance as it may seem, yet it is not so. If it's not chance, then who's deciding this? Who's bringing them together? Believe rather that it is so ordered that we who sit here and none others must now find counsel for the peril for the world. Rather that it is so ordered. Big theme in faith is that this is a God who brings order out of chaos. In the Lord of the Rings, God is never named, not even close. But Elrond is implying that there is an order across the universe that we can be part of. And then this sense of calling, we who sit here and none others must now find counsel for the peril for the world. Because those 9 sat round, some of them were thinking, why me? Why in our time? Why can't it be the time of the great heroes of old? But it is us and none others who must now find counsel for the peril for the world. Echoes perhaps of the biblical narrative of Esther, who is told that she is in her position for such a time as this. That's why she's been called. So that conclusion just reminded us that Tolkien saw the fellowship of good, the forces of good, as being in tune with something higher and stronger and everlasting, light and high beauty forever beyond the reach of the shadow. So our 7 points today about goodness, that the small matter, the hobbits do their stuff, wonderful variety and goodness, people just keep on going, that morality is important. For evil, it's addictive, destructive, it's also shadowy. How real is it really? How strong is it really? Trolls are not as strong as Ents. And then finally, that goodness is part of this higher, stronger goodness. C.S. Lewis's favourite phrase in The Lord of the Rings was the mention that there are times when great deeds are not wholly in vain. And that's because light is stronger than darkness, hope stronger than despair, good stronger than evil. So great deeds are never wholly in vain. Even at the time, it seems as if nothing good has come from them. I said I'd concentrate on The Lord of the Rings, partly because of a C.S. Lewis quote when he says, "The Hobbit," this is in a letter, "The Hobbit is merely a fragment of his myth, detached and adapted for children. The Lord of the Rings is the real stuff." So I think that if we want to understand Tolkien, it's very good to start with The Lord of the Rings, but let's not forget the other great things that he wrote. And just finally, a quotation from, in fact, not The Lord of the Rings, but from The Hobbit. And this says so much about Tolkien's value of priorities and of home and of friendship. If more of us, this is Thorin talking towards the end, if more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, a merrier world. Thank you so much for listening this evening.